Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Why is it very important to try to reduce the nuclear stockpile of the 15,000 nuclear weapons that are around the world? Today we're going to take a look at this very important issue, and my guest is an expert on nuclear disarmament. My guest today is the Undersecretary General and the High Representative for the United Nations Disarmament Affairs, Mr. Kim Won-soo. Mr. Undersecretary General, Your Excellency, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Mr. Bill Miller.
Thank you
so much.
I appreciate you being with me. You're dealing with a really hot topic in more ways than one. It's very, very hot. Let's talk a little bit for a moment, though, about the Office for Disarmament Affairs. When was it started? What's its main mission?
Our office has started as an independent office about 20 years ago after Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was agreed to be indefinitely extended. So my office now deals with, as you said, nuclear weapons, which is the biggest, worst, most powerful weapon, to a pistol. So biggest to smallest, and also it covers the space we are living in, our physical space in the world, but also it deals with what we can do to avoid militarization in cyberspace, outer space, Antarctica, Arctica, wherever space human beings can misuse for bad purposes.
Exactly. You run the gambit. You deal with nuclear, you deal with chemical, biological, and as you said, pistols, small arms. So we're going to get into each of those in just a moment and talk about the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But I think back, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, who recently concluded his second 5-year term, when he came in over 10 years ago, he had 5 major issues. Number one was probably climate change. I think he pushed that for many years very successfully. The second one was nuclear proliferation. Why was that so important to him as to one of the 5 major issues in the world to focus on?
Because Secretary General always defines climate change and nuclear weapons as the 2 most challenging existential threats to humankind. Climate change because of the scale, intensity of global warming, which can wreak havoc to the humankind. Nuclear weapons, even one nuclear weapon, can cause such a devastating consequences to humankind. So he always puts highest priority to dealing with these 2 existential threats.
And we think back to our history books, or many people were alive in August 1945 when the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, and the devastation was caused then. And today, these nuclear weapons are far more devastating, have far more firepower than they did at that time. Let's talk a little bit about, we can go through a few examples. One group, one person, the leader of North Korea, the Democratic Republic of North Korea, gets a lot of publicity because he has nuclear ambitions. What is the status of that right now? It may change 5 minutes from now or tomorrow, but what can be done? I know the UN has sanctions on North Korea, but what can be done to try to convince Kim Jong-un to reduce his nuclear ambitions and not move forward with the nuclear program?
It's an uphill task. And what North Korea, we call it Democratic People's Republic of Korea, UN, DPRK.
DPRK,
what they are doing is very threatening, not only to regional peace and security in Northeast Asia, but also to global disarmament and non-proliferation regime, because DPRK is the only country which breaks the global norm against the nuclear testing in 21st century. So North Korea's threat is real, and international community through the Security Council sends a very strong united call not to do it, to call on DPRK to reverse the course and get back to denuclearization. But sanctions alone will not be sufficient, because sanctions do matter as a united message and call from the international community to DPRK to reverse the course, but it can be effective as much as it is implemented, and implementation requires every country's participation. And also, it has to be supported by other broader diplomatic strategy.
And this is one of the advantages of the United Nations, to bring the countries of the world together, and especially through the Security Council, the 15-member body of the Security Council, to focus on this situation, to draft resolutions, to come up perhaps with sanctions, or perhaps come up with incentives. As you said, it has to be much broader. Another area of great concern has been with the Iranian nuclear program. And of course, we saw in 2015, I guess it was in July and August, that the permanent 5 members of the Security Council plus 1, Germany, along with the United Nations and along with the European Union, helped broker really an agreement to sort of unwind the Iranian nuclear program. What is the status of that at this point?
The Iranian nuclear deal, we call it JCPOA, is a great achievement, because any non-proliferation challenge, if it can be dealt with by diplomatic solution, that's the best, most preferred option, because we can avoid war and we can deal with non-proliferation challenge by peaceful means. So it is a great achievement. That said, it'll be very challenging, because the deal will have to be implemented for the next 8, 10, even maybe longer years. So implementation on both sides has to be implemented, has to be carefully proceeded by both sides, and it requires highest level attention by the leaders on both sides for the next at least 10 years. And it'll be a challenging process.
It certainly is. And a lot of people, when we think back to 2015, the great minds at the time, the scientists and the political leaders, thought that Iran was within 6 to 12 months of developing a nuclear weapon, and had that agreement not been reached, the next logical outcome would have been a war, and some type of war, some type of conflict. And in that situation, when you're talking nuclear weapons, nobody wins a nuclear war, do they? Even if they are able to stop that program, if any of that material escapes or something, it's really a lose-lose situation.
Absolutely. And also, on Iran's challenge, international community acted before Iran acquired nuclear capability. And also, that deal is engineered with the participation of all permanent members of the Security Council plus EU. So participation and guarantees are broader than the Geneva Agreement on DPRK 10 years earlier. So when international community acts fast before the target country doesn't acquire real nuclear capability, it is easier to roll back. So once the country acquires nuclear capability and even able to produce delivery means, then it becomes more challenging. So international community, I think, in my view, has learned the right lesson from its early experience dealing with the DPRK, and this time they did the right thing.
And by most rational observers, this agreement seems to be holding. The International Atomic Energy Agency, a UN agency, has monitors who are monitoring the program. The Iranians seem to be abiding by it. The U.S. has released, you hear a lot of misinformation, especially in the U.S. media, about releasing $150 billion, giving U.S. money to Iran, which is not true at all. The Iranians got about $54 billion of their own money that had been frozen by the United States several years ago when we had a conflict or disagreement with Iran. So it seems to be that the agreement is holding, and it's certainly in everybody's best interest to pursue it and to make sure that it goes forward, because the consequence, the alternative, is just totally not, it's really just non-feasible. Yeah. It's just really
absolutely
disastrous.
Agree with you. I mean, the alternative is worse. So this is the best possible outcome. Also, verification is the key. Right. DPRK nuclear deal collapsed because of the lack of reliable verification. But on Iran, we have a very credible, robust verification mechanism. IAEA is working on it. So verification will remain the key. And if Iranian deal is implemented as all wish for the next at least 10 years, then it is set a very good example in dealing with other similar challenges. Because as President Reagan famously said, trust but verify.
Exactly.
Unless
Trust
we
but
verify.
That's right.
No deal.
No deal.
Can
Three
last.
important words.
Yes.
That's very true. And of course, if we look, before we get off nuclear weapons, because they are so expensive, we hear now that Russia, the United States are thinking about modernizing their nuclear weapons because their systems are pretty old, come right down to it. But these are expensive. They're talking about over $1 trillion of investment, which will be way beyond that. That's just a ballpark figure. Plus, the United States is spending, it is reported, about $125 million a day just to maintain their nuclear weapon system. And of course, there are 9 nuclear powers today. They don't have weapon arsenals as big as Russia and the United States. They have those two have most of them. But it seems that we could hopefully move forward to help even reduce those arsenals even more and to reduce the cost, because that money could be used for infrastructure development, schools, roads, hospitals, whatever the case might be, peacekeeping missions. But it seems like we have better uses for literally the trillions of dollars that are being spent.
Absolutely. Although, I mean, if we compare the number with the peak number at the height of the Cold War, it was 54,000. So now it is reduced to 15,000.
Number of nuclear weapons.
Number of nuclear weapons. So it is a significant achievement. But still, as we discussed, one nuclear weapon, very old model, like the bomb dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, can cause such a devastating consequences. Even one is too many. And why world has to spend so much, not only on nuclear armaments, but also defense expenditures in total. So if we can release a small portion of that money to finance sustainable development goals, then development goals can be easily met. So I absolutely agree with your view.
Exactly. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would encourage our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you are involved with any type of media outlet, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps you're involved with an educational institution, a university that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you're interested in these programs and you would like to share them with your family, friends, community, just the world at large, please feel free to go to the website and download the programs. They're provided as an international public service, free of charge, at no cost, to help people better understand international issues and how they impact us, no matter where we live in the world. Today we're taking a look at weapons, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons, and how devastating they can be and how we need to focus upon them as soon as we can, because there's a proliferation underway. My guest today is an expert on this particular issue. Mr. Kim Won-soo is the Undersecretary General and High Representative for UN Disarmament Affairs. I've gotten my fault bogged down on nuclear weapons because they are so critical. But let's move into, well, before we leave that, one other question is, if the countries of the world came together either through the Conference on Disarmament or whatever the body may be, and said we want to reduce our nuclear weapons, are there safeguards? The big question is, how can a country be assured that country X may give up the weapons, country Y may say, well, I gave them up, but I still have them, and then that country could blackmail country X, whatever. Is there some way we can be assured of that?
For that purpose, verification matters.
Verification, right.
And also safeguard measures matter. And International Atomic Energy Agency was created for that purpose, to provide inspection, verification, to ensure that those who are not allowed to have nuclear weapons or radiological weapons should not have that kind of program on their soil. So IAEA, with their member states accepting those obligations, have to open up their facilities for inspection by the IAEA.
Now, President John F. Kennedy, I think it was back in 1961, I believe I read that, along in that era, he said that the way the countries of the world were developing nuclear weapons, that within 50 years, there would be 50 countries or more. Today, we only have 9. Fortunately, that's probably 9 too many. But what has caused the countries not to develop? I know the expense can be part of the problem, but why have more countries not done that? Is it because of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and you can tell me what that is too, but what are the reasons?
You are exact. I mean, you are absolutely right. I mean, President Kennedy would have proved right if we don't have nuclear non-proliferation treaty, as we call it NPT. NPT was agreed after President Kennedy said it, and then international community recognized the growing danger that the more countries have nuclear weapons, the more dangerous our world will become. Not only because of the likelihood of nuclear war by intention, but also nuclear war by miscommunication, misunderstanding. So inadvertent nuclear war is likely to happen. So international community agrees on NPT with understanding only 5 countries which have developed nuclear weapons by that time will be allowed. So as you said, 9, but in our world, accepting non-NPT, only 5 countries are recognized as nuclear weapon states.
Oh, really?
The other
Okay.
4,
The other 4.
they claim.
So,
the
Israel, North Korea, Pakistan, and India,
I will not
they
name
just
them,
don't.
but
Right.
because of NPT,
Right, exactly.
the international community has managed to limit the number of nuclear possessor countries to single digit. If we didn't have NPT, President Kennedy would have proved right, maybe 30 or even more.
Exactly. And you mentioned a minute ago something, well, you mentioned several things very important. One was accidental.
Yes.
Something accidental could happen. And there have been, I know of at least 12 reported incidents since 1945 of where there was almost some type of interaction, primarily between the United States and the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union. And that's the fear that many people have, is that something could happen, a computer could malfunction. And that did happen. Soviets, at one point, the radar system malfunctioned. They thought the U.S. had launched a series of ballistic missiles against them. That is a major problem that could actually trigger a nuclear war. And if it happened, we would literally see the living organisms, most of them on the Earth, would be eliminated.
Absolutely. And that was the real story. And that story was made as a movie. The title of the movie, called The Man Who Saved the World.
The Man Who Saved the World.
And I saw the film, I was shocked. And the screen showed nuclear weapons were launched by the US. But thankfully, the commander in charge in that situation center refused to retaliate. But not once, twice.
Twice
on that night.
On that night, yes.
So if that commander didn't make the right judgment, ignoring that sign on the screen, real nuclear war would have started.
We wouldn't be here today.
Yes.
We would not be here today.
So I was shocked to see that film.
Exactly. And the same thing happened in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, because one of the submarine commanders was given the order to launch, and he was not far off the shore of Florida, the coastline of Florida, and had he done that, it would have been a totally different world. Well, I apologize for getting so bogged down on nuclear weapons, but they are so important and they're so lethal. We really need to focus on these. But before we run out of time, just very briefly, if you could mention very briefly chemical and biological, why are they important that we need to know about them?
The chemical weapons were used in the First World War. And also it was used in Iraq in the 90s. And that awakened the international community on the need to prohibit chemical weapons. But unfortunately, chemical weapons and use of toxic chemicals as weapons have re-emerged in the Middle East. So we are working very hard to stop it. unless the taboo against the use of chemical weapons is restored, we'll see much more dangerous world. Because one of the chemical attack joint investigation mechanism we launched with Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons found at least one instance non-state actors, terrorist group used it. So it is not just state actors but also non-state actors. Then what had happened? And biological weapons is also very dangerous because at the last Nuclear Security Summit, the leaders were shown a video simulated exercise. If terrorist group activates their cells and stealing chemical, radiological, or biological material by hacking, and then they transfer to third country and assemble it for an attack in another country. And if they use it, spreading it by drones.
Exactly.
Then it'll be very difficult to trace who does it. But because of the spread drones can do, so the exercise shows that if it is radiological material called cesium, and if it is used by and spread by drones, then few kilometers in urban center will be affected. But if it is chemical, then it will be maybe twice larger area. But if it is biological, it could be 5 to 6 times larger. So the damage and consequences will be much greater. But on biological side, unfortunately, we don't have IAEA on nuclear and radiological threats, and also OPCW on chemical weapons, but we don't have corresponding international institutions specifically designed to deal with the biological threat. So our office, UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, has to bear the burden of keeping the fort on biological side. But I'm appealing to all member states that we have to step up what we are doing to address growing biological threats.
Well, in the last hardest question, last 30 seconds we have, what role has the famous actor Michael Douglas played in helping to get the message out about the devastation that could occur with nuclear weapons?
Michael Douglas has been a great friend and advocate for disarmament. He has been the one of the maybe dozen messengers of peace of the Secretary General for the last 20 years, but he devoted mostly on disarmament cause. So he has been a great advocate against nuclear proliferation, but also dealing with other disarmament challenges. And not only he is a great great advocate and also raise awareness from the public, but also he personally commits financially, and also he commits a lot of his time to educating and disseminating the young generation about the danger. So I owe personally a great gratitude to him.
He has been a very forceful advocate, very
Absolutely.
Effective, and he is passionate about this. Well, I do apologize because we've not been able to get into the Small Arms Treaty. We have not been able to get into some Security Council
We have so many
resolutions.
issues, maybe next
we
time.
will come back for that at a later date. But
Sure.
Undersecretary General Kim Won-soo, I want to thank you so very much for bringing this very important issue to our attention, because we all need to learn more about it. And our viewers can go to www.un.org. They can Google nuclear disarmament affairs, your office, whatever the case might be, to learn more about it. But I want to thank you so very much.
Thank you so
for
much.
a very
Yeah, thank
interesting
you.
and a very
Thank you.
informative program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.